Hello and welcome to Easy as Pie with Mr. Carpenter. I'm Mr. Carpenter, and this is for Algebra 2. We're looking at grouping today as the final method of factoring for us, and it usually involves quadrinomials, or in other words, a polynomial of four terms. So something along the lines of, that should be plus 4x minus 5x minus 20. Okay, and it's going to be something along the lines of factor this completely. So what will we do? Well, step one in grouping, right? In Algebra 2, if you see a quadrinomial and they ask you to factor it, 99 times out of 100, they are going to ask you to do grouping. That's the most popular one that they want here. So what do? We are going to start by putting them into groups. Right? So there's the group that we put them in. And we are going to greatest common factor the first group, which is the first two terms, and then we're going to greatest common factor the last two terms. So GCF the first two, GCF the last two. Okay, so looking at these two terms first, their greatest common factor, what they both share, they both have a variable x. So I can factor out an x. X squared divided by x is x, plus 4x divided by x will just be 4. Then I look to the next one. Carry the minus sign, and the greatest common factor of 5x and 20 will just be 5, because they don't both share a variable. So I'm going to factor out a 5. And instead of carrying this negative sign, I'm really factoring out a negative 5. So when I do this, when I factor these two, right, I have negative 5x divided by negative 5, which will just be x. And then I have negative 20 divided by negative 5, which is positive 4. And this is kind of your check that you did factor by grouping right, or your check that it was even possible. If these two polynomials inside the parentheses match, then you have done factor by grouping correctly, or you're on to something, right? So from that point, how do you factor this? Well, the terms inside the parentheses get their own parentheses, and the terms outside the parentheses get their own parentheses. And that would be a fully factored version of this problem. Okay, so let's look at a different one. Let's look at two more, and then we'll cap this video off for the day. Let's do 6x cubed plus 3x squared plus 8x plus 4. Commonly, factor by grouping will involve a cubic quadrinomial of some sort. Same process. I'll start by GCFing, right? Greatest common factoring, the first two terms. So the greatest common factor of 6 and 3 would be 3. And the greatest common factor of x cubed and x squared would be x squared, right? I want to take the one with the smallest exponent, start the parentheses, and then I divide both terms by the greatest common factor, right? This is stuff that we should hopefully be a little more comfortable with now. 6 divided by 3 is 2. X cubed divided by x squared is x to the power of 1, because I just subtract those exponents. Plus 3 divided by 3, those will cancel out. And x squared divided by x squared, those will both cancel out, right? They're dividing out to 1, right? 3 divided by 3 is 1, and x squared divided by x squared is 1, right? Normally, when things cancel out because they divide to 1, we don't have to write anything. But because everything cancels, I can't just put 0, right? Because they don't divide to 0. They divide to 1. So there's going to be a 1 as a placeholder there. Close up shop. Then I'm going to work on the next two. Greatest common factor of 8x and 4 is going to be 8. So I carry, a 4, right? Because 4 goes nicely into 8 and 4 goes nicely into 4. So I can factor out a 4. 8x divided by 4 is going to be 2x, and 4 divided by 4 is positive 1. And now we see the same thing here, right, where the stuff in the parentheses matches up. So The stuff inside the parentheses gets its own parentheses, and the stuff outside the parentheses gets its own parentheses. And that is another example. Let's do one more just for clarity. I'm going to do x cubed minus 2x squared plus 5x minus 10. Okay. First two terms, what's their greatest common factor? Well, I can't take a greatest common factor of the numbers because 1 and negative 2 don't have 1. But the variables, they both share a variable. So the smallest exponent would be x squared. So I can factor in x squared. X cubed divided by x squared is just x because 3 minus 2 is 1. Negative 2x squared divided by x squared, right? These terms will cancel out, and I'm just left with that negative 2. Then I'll work on the second one, greatest common factor of 5x and negative 10. I can factor out a positive 5 from both. 5x divided by 5, those will cancel out, and I'm just left with x. Negative 10 divided by 5 is negative 2. And now, look at this. These match. So the stuff inside the parentheses gets its own parentheses, and the stuff outside the parentheses gets its own parentheses. And even here, you got to pay attention to things like this, right? This could have been x squared minus 4, which is a difference of perfect squares and can be rewritten as x plus 2, x minus 2, right? So even within grouping, you might still come across polynomials in parentheses that can be factored further. So just make sure that you are looking for things. Mainly DOPS is the biggest one that you're going to find because it's going to be like x squared minus 4 or x squared minus 16. But make sure you're looking out for those. Make sure you can't take any more greatest common factors. But as long as you do that, you should be okay. And this is Factor by Grouping. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you